Outrage is growing in Los Angeles after the LA Times published secretly recorded audio of Latino city leaders making a series of derogatory and racist remarks last year as they conspired to consolidate their power. For example, City Council President, Democrat Nury Martinez, called a fellow councilman's black child, quote, a little monkey, and described how she would have punished the then 2-year-old boy.
And then there's this white guy with this little black kid who's misbehaved. The kid is bouncing off the effing walls on the floor, practically tipping it over. They're raising him like a little white kid, which I was like, this kid needs a beat down. Like, let me take him around the corner and then I'll bring him back.
The comments have led to widespread calls for those on the recordings to resign. Earlier today, protests erupted at the city council's meeting. Martinez said she'd step down as president of the city council and take a leave of absence, but not resign. For more on all of this, I'm joined now by LA Times opinion columnist Erika Smith, who has been covering this very closely. Erika Smith, thank you so much for being here. We saw a touch of the protest that broke out at the city council today. Can you just give us a sense of what is the mood like in the city right now?
Well, I think people are very upset. They're very angry with what's happened. I think that was expressed definitely in the council meeting earlier today, where hundreds showed up, tried to get in the chamber. Many more were outside and even blocking a few streets, calling for the resignation of these 3 council members involved. But I also think there was a lot of hurt. The council person you mentioned, whose black child was called a monkey. I mean, he made an impassioned speech, tearful speech. That really, I think, captured the kind of hurt and surprise at these comments that have come out.
Can you remind us, for those of us who are not in California or not Angelenos, who else is mixed up in this scandal?
So there are 3 specific councilmen, former council president Nury Martinez, who has taken a leave of absence, 2 others, Councilman Kevin De Leon and Gil Cedillo, both of whom are Latino and have been on the council for a while. And there's also a labor leader, Ron Herrera, who has actually resigned or offered his resignation last night, actually. So those are the 4 people that are involved in this recording.
I'd like to read something that you wrote earlier this week about all of this. You wrote, quote, this entire ugly incident blows a massive hole in the narrative that many would like to believe about Los Angeles and about California being some sort of multicultural Mecca where black and brown people build alliances to work together in solidarity towards solving problems. How so?
Well, I think that there's this notion of California, right, as this, obviously the left coast, very liberal state. Los Angeles is a very diverse city. And there's a sense that we embrace our multiculturalism, which is true. But I also think that there is an undercurrent, obviously, of racism and of inequity. And I think that that is starting to come out with these recordings. We saw some of that in 2020 after George Floyd. We had massive protests here, Black Lives Matter and the like. But we are seeing something else between racial tensions between Black and Latino Angelenos and this kind of struggle for power. And I think that is, it's a narrative that I think some of us know pretty well, but in a narrative that I think a lot of people here in Los Angeles thought we left behind in the 90s, but is still rearing its ugly head and showing itself again.
I mean, that divide between blacks and Latinos might strike a lot of people as a surprise because people tend to think of them as natural political allies and social allies.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely the allegiances and the alliances there. I think everybody recognizes it intellectually. And I think there have been several efforts to kind of draw both communities together to address everything from housing prices to homelessness to public safety. But there's also this sense here in Los Angeles where Latinos make up more than 50% of the population. There's a fear that they will kind of take over political power within the city structure and run the city specifically for Latinos and leave out the needs of the Black residents here. And, while our needs are similar, there are some differences. And I think there's some kind of a struggle for power that's been going on for quite some time. And this tape really shows that.
Right. The tape was a meeting that was going on where these Latino leaders and this labor leader were talking about how to redraw some boundaries that might, in the end, exclude blacks from political power.
Yes, this was a conversation that happened basically a year ago at the time when redistricting was happening in the city of Los Angeles. And, redistricting is contentious no matter where you are in the country. But in this case, it was about how do you draw maps according to this conversation, in a way that benefits Latino constituents and Latino political power to this extent at the expense of Black political power. And so it was really, I mean, aside from the horrific, insults that were brought up, it was really an hour-long strategy session on how to dilute Black political power in Los Angeles. And that is, what part of the other thing that really, really upset a lot of people here.
And lastly, in just the few seconds we have left, this also comes as your city is going through a major mayoral election. There's a big debate happening tonight. How is that going to echo in that race?
Yeah, already both candidates, Karen Bass and Rick Caruso, are kind of positioning themselves to be the person that's going to shepherd Los Angeles through this next chapter, and saying that they are the person that's the right person to kind of heal some of the tension that's happening. Karen Bass has a history of doing that in the city with a nonprofit she founded. Rick Caruso says that he is the one to do it because he's outside of the political system. So it'll be up to voters to decide, but to see what they have to say tonight.
All right, Erika Smith of the Los Angeles Times, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on.